This episode of Sideline Warnings is brought to you by Innovative Mechanical, proudly serving the Bay Area since 1984. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Sideline Warnings. Thank you so much for tuning in, being here with us, listening to our banter, our fun, our laughter, and our segments today. As always, next to me, we have Elijah Falau, aka Falafamui. Number 2, we got Maddie V, our reality superstar. And number 3, our special guest of the day, our director of 24/7 Sports, Brandon Huffman. Thank you so much for being here, B-Huff.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
So, B-Huff, what we do here at Sideline Warnings is we script our practice, or we script our segments and our channel in the terms of a football practice. So we start off with our pre-practice, we get into our special tees, we'll get into our blitz on cans, and we have a lot of questions for you. Really, we want to kind of get into our recruiting segment. We want to talk to you about what you're looking for, all those things. But before we do all that, we kind of want to learn a little bit more about you. Like, how did you get started in recruiting? What kind of prompted you to get in the business? How does it work? And can you explain a little bit about that? We'd love to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. So I graduated college in 1998. And at that point, the internet was just starting to take off in terms of recruiting coverage, college football coverage. So I started out actually as a Pac-10 writer. That's how long ago it was. That conference existed,
Yes.
and it was the Pac-10. And so I was covering the Pac-10 for the original, very first incarnation of Rivals.com, which is different than the Rivals that you know now.
Sure. Yeah.
But I was working for College Football Digest, was the Pac-10 writer. Then in 2000, the .com bubble burst. Mm-hmm. And I ended up working for a website called Fanstop.com. I was their NCAA sports managing editor, covering college football and college basketball. And I was born and raised in Southern California and went to a Pacific University to play football in 1994.
Okay.
And then quickly realized that, there was not a future for a 6'1" tight end in the early 90s who played in the Veer. So sure. I pivoted into working in the athletic department, got my degree in journalism. And when college football was starting to take off with the recruiting coverage online, as opposed to the old days where you read the day after signing day in USA Today or in the LA Times, you read about, who signed where. And so 2003 comes around and I'm covering college football and college basketball. And I'm at UCLA press conference when they're introducing Ben Howland as their basketball coach. And a guy named Tracy Pearson was working for at the time it was now Scout.com. And if you ever want to get really bored with how the .com bubble, impacted recruiting websites, that's a whole other segment. But yeah, he said, hey, you know what? You know college football, recruiting. Why don't you come cover recruiting for Scout.com, cover UCLA and USC recruiting? So that first year, it was Carl Durrell's first year at UCLA, and it was Pete Carroll's third year at USC, where they would go on to win the national championship. And I started covering recruiting. So my first recruiting class was in 2003, 2004, signing day 2004. And it's so long ago that my first class at that time, I interviewed a guy named Marshawn Lynch and a guy named Adrian Peterson, because both of those guys were considering UCLA and USC. And I think AP just finally retired after 16 years in the NFL. And so I'm now probably about 6 months ago, I did my first second generation interview where I'm interviewing a guy who I covered his dad.
Wow.
Which means I'm old. Yes. So I went through, and so 2003, I started with Scout.com. In 2005, Scout was sold to Fox Sports. So I worked for Fox Sports for 8 years. And then in 2013, Fox sold it back to the original founder of the original Rivals, who started Scout after bankrupting it. So I went back to Scout.com in 2013. Then he bankrupted us a second time. And fortunately, CBS bought Scout.com, already had owned 24/7, and then merged 24/7 and Scout. And 24/7 had a presence really in the Southeast and the Midwest, but they didn't have a presence out West. So myself and Greg Biggins and Blair Angelo, we all went over to 24/7, and I've been with them for a little over 7 years now as their national recruiting editor. So when signing day comes around for this class, it'll be my 22nd recruiting class that I will have covered. So I'm kind of getting to be a dinosaur in this area, in this industry.
That is an insane story. I actually remember in early 2000s of looking at Scout.com literally religiously, every single day.
Thank you. Keep doing it religiously. I got to get kids through college.
Yes, I'm with you. Well, Elijah was like 3 years old, so he doesn't even know what scout.com is.
No, it was
And, Maddie was
I tried to get on that.
You tried to get on it.
Scout and Rivals. Let's get on
they slept on you. I'm sure that's what happened.
I mean, just like you said, 6'1" tight end. I mean, everybody. I'm a dime a dozen. I'm a 6'1" linebacker.
Yeah.
That was also 190 playing safety. So dime a dozen on that one.
Yeah, I mean, in regards to the recruiting stuff and all that stuff, what kind of, I mean, you said APU, right? So Azusa Pacific, big fan. You know, we got a lot of, we actually, I know quite a few people went down there, said they absolutely loved it.
Right.
But so when you think about all the things that you've done in the last 20, 21 years, right? From 03, 04 to now, like we're looking at 21 years, 20 years. What's like one of the biggest like takeaways that you get like from recruiting? And what's one of the things that you can like look back and be like, wow, that was so much different back then compared to where it is now?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because I say this a lot. There has been like 6 different seasons, if you will, over the 20 years as I've been doing this. When I first started in 2003, kids didn't have cell phones. You had home phone numbers. Yeah. You would call a kid and hope that he answered, hope that mom or dad gave him the message, and then you'd sit at your home phone. And remember, this is back in the early 2000s where you were getting charged per minute on a cell phone. So you're like, hey, do I want to really use my 200 minutes this month on some high school kid filling me in on his recruitment, or do I have him call me at the home phone? And I remember you'd call our kid, and then my wife, bless her heart, she would take messages on our home phone if I wasn't there. And, she would write down the message and give me the phone number. And I'm like, I do not know who this is that you're talking about. She would put it down like phonetically. And I was like, oh, okay. Now I think I figured out who you're talking about. 2007, 2006, 2007, there was this website called MySpace. And, funny story, Scout and MySpace were both bought by Fox on the same exact day in 2005. They bought Scout for $55 million. They bought MySpace for $550 million.
Yeah, Tom got paid out.
Tom got paid. Exactly. But our first digital friend. And the funny thing was, there was supposed to be this like merger sort of, technology wise between Scout and MySpace. Within like 2 years, this website called Facebook took over and MySpace was no longer. And Scout was the one that lasted and made money for Fox. So always a fun bit of side trivia, but you would get a hold of kids via MySpace. And then, it became, you would talk to kids over their own cell phones. And then it was eventually, text messaging got banned by the NCAA. Then, Twitter came in and, you went from, I could call a kid one time every 2 months and nothing really happened in his recruitment since the last time to now, kids are getting offered every minute of every day. And like anything in society right now, everything is information overload. Yeah. But we have seen how recruiting has shifted away from the old days of, and I'm part of an era where like, if you were good, your coach would make a VHS tape, put it in a manila envelope, send it to the school, and then ask the school, hey, when you're done watching this, can you send this video back to us so we can send it to another school? And that did, I mean, you could be at a school with 60 high school kids and there's 5 Division I players. Well, those are the only 5 that got a VHS tape made for them. Yep. And, it took the teacher who was in charge of visual communications forever to put those videos in. Well, now middle schoolers have a huddle tape. Freshmen have huddles. And they all, set it out. Oh, here's a clip of my freshman highlights. And it's, with all due respect to freshman team football, no stickers on the helmet, no cheerleaders on the sideline, no fans in the stands. But they're setting up that film in hopes that it gets them recruiting attention. Yeah. So it went from you really had to be the best of the best and your coach truly had to believe in you to now, hey, all you got to have really is a digital connection, a cell phone plan, and, data plan. You might get yourself recruited. Now, will you get yourself signed? We don't know. But, and now we're in an era where, and I, to this day, I mean, we've seen so many different versions, but I still say that July 1st, 2021 was the single most pivotal day in college football recruiting because that was the day that NIL became legal. Mm-hmm. And that was also the summer where the one-time transfer and mandatory sit-out year were done. Yeah. Since that point, we've seen the portal and NIL completely transfix the direction of college football. And I say that as crazy as COVID was and how that impacted recruiting, NIL and the portal, which the portal's existed since the fall of 2017, but that day changed an entire sport and the sub-sports, if you will, of college football.
No, I completely agree. And we've talked about on this podcast multiple times, just how crazy the portal and NIL and all these things have really impacted high school sports, junior college sports, Division I sports, Division II, and Division 1A, AA, because it's like NAI, like all these sports, because now it feels as if, and I'd love to get your perspective on this, it feels as if the D1 AA schools are now feeder programs to the Division 1A schools, the top Division 1A schools.
It's almost like even Group 5s that matter. The Mountain West now. It's
yes.
Like, those are the stepping stones if you want to go.
Yes.
Tim Tolik, plug your ears. But it's like JUCO football has been overlooked, and there's some damn good talent. I mean, you guys, Sarah High School had Sione Lale a couple of years ago, who ended up being the #1 JUCO player in the country.
Yes.
Guys like that are kind of rare now because the FCS schools are becoming kind of the new junior colleges. You go there for 2 years, you prove yourself. Now you can go big. I was at this 5-on-5 today, and there was a kid there who's got a couple of Big Sky offers. And Big Sky is probably being obliterated more than any conference.
It has to be.
I mean, it's always been one of the premier conferences in the FCS.
Yeah,
with Eastern Washington, with Montana State, the resurgence of Idaho in recent years. I mean, I remember when Cal Poly took Wisconsin to overtime 10 years ago and probably could have beat them. And I want to say that was a Wisconsin team that ended up going to the Rose Bowl. So, the Big Sky's got this proud history, but now they're being punished for being phenomenal evaluators. And they're being punished for being phenomenal developers because guys go there, they flourish. And the next thing you know, now they go into the portal. And not only are they going to big time schools, they're getting nice NIL paydays out of it. And they're making more than the head coach of the FCS school they just left was making in his salary. So, so as I'm watching this kid today and I'm watching him and he's got these Big Sky offers, I'm like, that's the kid that goes to that school for 3 years. They turn him into an all conference, all Big Sky guy. He goes into the portal. And the next thing you know, he's on a playoff team his junior year.
Yeah.
We're seeing, I live in Seattle now, not far from the University of Washington. And, UW just got 2 players from Sac State this year, guys that played at Folsom High School, went to Sac State, and now they're transferring up. I think in the last 2-3 years, I counted somewhere of like maybe 20 Big Sky guys that I covered at some point transferred up after 2, 3, 4 years at their Big Sky school. So if it's happening out west, which is, if there's a FCS conference I focus on, it's the Big Sky, but it's happening, with the Missouri Valley, with North Dakota State. It's happening, down south in these other kind of pockets where FCS football is good. I mean, shoot, the most expensive player in the portal this year was Cam Ward, who was the quarterback at Incarnate Word in 2021, goes to Washington State because his head coach becomes the OC. Ends up getting $1.5 million, I think is what the reported deal was with Miami this year. And he's waiting, do I go to the NFL or do I go to Miami? And, do I maybe get drafted? Do I not get drafted? Or do I take 7 figures to go play quarterback in Miami and potentially improve my stock? That's the problem with FCS. You do a great job evaluating when nobody else is on them. You do a great job developing them. And then the second they go on Twitter, they haven't necessarily thought about going into the portal, but all of a sudden they're looking at their follows. Assistant DPP at this school, general manager at this school, position coach at this school. And they're all like, why would you follow them if they're already out of school? Well, you're trying to follow them into going into the portal. So that has impacted the FCS more than anything from a current play, but then it's also impacted JUCOs. Now, if I'm a coach, I can go find a guy that's played 2 years of FCS football rather than maybe go look at a GC. I can go look at the kid who he's probably at a school that had a $1 million game where they went on the road and played a top 25 team. So now I've at least got some film of this guy going against a Power 5 player. He held his own. Hey, this guy might be the one player that we need. So that trickle down effect. And what's happening because of the portal, I know this is kind of a long-winded answer, but it's
go for it.
Multifaceted because of the portal. Because I see this phrase all the time. The portal is killing recruiting. It's not killing recruiting because there's still 85 scholarships at the FBS level. There's still 60 plus at FCS, 40 plus at D2 and none in D3, but NAI. Those guys are still filling spots. What it is, it's recalibrating. So in the old days when a guy might have been the 25th player in a class. He got an offer on February 4th and signing day is February 5th.
Yep.
Now that guy, they're not even bothering recruiting him in February. He's now signing with an FCS school. So FCS schools are signing better classes than they ever did before. D2s are getting better players than they did before because of the trickle-down effect. But the problem is now they're losing them up. And so it's kind of like this shell game of guys moving around from conference to conference, from division level to division level, still the same amount of bodies. But now instead of let's go find a guy out of the JUCO ranks, let's go find a guy from the FCS or a group of 5 school to increase our stock. Because that one position is the difference between us making the playoff and us going to the stay-at-home.com bowl.
Totally agree. Do you think, I mean, now that we talk about, we're getting into like actual recruiting of like the D1A schools, like the premier top dogs, right? We're looking at Bama's, we're talking Georgia's, we're talking SC's, all these big dog schools, the blue bloods, if you will. But do you think, like, from what it sounds like, do you think the FCS guys, like, they just grind and they grind and they grind to get the most talented players that they know they can develop? So would you say like that they're just better recruiters? And it's like, okay, cool. So this is exactly the guy we got. He's 6 foot, 230 pounds. He plays linebacker, sideline to sideline kind of guy. And he's missed because he's a 6 foot, 230 pound linebacker. Then they see, oh, wow, this guy can play. He's actually legit. So it's like, now we're just going to steal him because of money.
Jared Verse is the perfect example of that. He was an unremarkable signee with Albany. I think that's what he was, either Albany or one of those upstate New York schools, FCS guy, goes there for a year or two, all of a sudden goes through puberty in college, transfers to Florida State, ends up an All-American and a top 15 pick, top 20 pick.
Wow.
You know, but you know, and I was having dinner with an FCS position coach about 2 weeks ago. We were talking about that, you know, that very thing, like, you know, they are able to take chances on guys more because they usually have bigger rosters. They, you know, they have a little bit more. Doesn't mean they have more money for those kids on the roster, but like, you know, it's not unusual for a California Big Sky school to bring a guy in on a partial. I mean, there's a reason Montana State do so well is in-state tuition is not expensive, so they get those kids in state to come on a partial. Well, if you have 45 scholarships and you're only going to assign 15 in a class, well, now you technically have 30 scholarships in that class because 2 guys are sharing 1. Yeah. And so you can take a little bit more chances on guys. But the FBS level, and especially at the Power 5 level, fans aren't patient. Head coaches aren't patient. So I do not, you know, I remember having this conversation with Jim Mahalchuk, who's now the offensive line coach at Michigan State. And this one, he was at Oregon State, and there's a kid from, you know, not far from where I live, Tallis Fuanga, who we were at the same camp where he offered him and pushed him. And I went to a game his senior year. My son, I hired him to go film it from the stands. And it was about the 4th series of the game. He's like, Dad, he has not made 1 block. And I stopped filming him. And I remember texting Coach Mahalchuk after, like, hey, man, rough game for Tallis. He's like, hey, you know, I don't expect him to come in and play next year. I mean, I just need him to sit for a year or 2, develop, and he'll be fine. Well, he ends up being a first-round draft pick, an All-American at Oregon State. But he saw in his junior year this kid who played at a program that was 0-9, that was losing to everybody. He saw the ability to develop this guy. And there's a reason that Oregon State did so well under Jonathan Smith, is because they were the school that would take the Flyers and develop them. Yeah. You can't do that across the state at Oregon. They want those guys that can play now. Yeah. USC wants the guys that can play now. Yeah. You know, Washington wants to play the guys that can play now. Well, some of these schools can't afford to do that. They have to play the long game. Well, now you're punished if you're playing the long game, because if you do any kind of sense of development, that guy's gone. To go back to kind of the other part of the question is, I think with a lot of FCS coaches, they're grinders and they're developers, but there's also that hope that, hey, package deal. I found this defensive end. We've now turned him into an FCS star. Well, you might be wanting a young, aggressive recruiter who's going to get out on the road and pound the pavement and be a grinder. I'm ready for that. I'm ready to work the same amount of hours, if not less, but make 10 times the salary I'm making at that FCS school. So defensive end coach, defensive end comes with me. Sure. So I think that, you know, they kind of correlate in terms of their willingness to be grinders. Those guys are moving up the ladder and wanting to move up the ladder themselves. You know, 10 years ago, Kalen DeBoer was the head coach at an NAIA school. Now he's the head coach at the University of Alabama. Yeah. And, you know, people bemoan the fact that he doesn't last long at school. Well, that's what coaches do when they're successful. You keep moving up the ladder. Now he is literally at the premier college football program in college football history.
Yeah, the pinnacle of it. That's so funny that you mentioned it. I literally never would have thought that coaches, because of their willingness to grind and find kids, that there's also that own hidden agenda of them that like, hey, I've done a really good job with 4 of the last 5 guys that I've recruited at the defensive end. So I'm going to bring them with me. And on top of that, I know how to get guys and I know how to evaluate. I mean, that's just something that literally I never thought of in terms of coaching too. So anyway, that was a hefty pre-practice for us. And I really appreciate all the insight and stuff like that. But we're going to get into our special teas segment, which is basically introducing our guest and who you are, where you're from, which you've already told us. But I kind of want, for our viewers and for the people out there, all 17 of them that we have currently, what goes into your talent evaluation? So like when you're going out there, right, and you're at these showcases, you're at these camps, you're flying to them, you're driving to them, you're doing whatever. How do you look for, like, is potential involved in it? Is it the metrics? Is it like, what is it? Because we're talking about FCS guys, and a lot of people these days that we talk about, we coach with, we understand because we know the lay of the land. It's like it's D1 or bust. And that's really not how it is these days.
Yeah.
So like, what's your take on that? How does your factor into your 24/7 rating? Like, how does that work? And what does that look like?
So my first year in this recruiting industry, 2003, I went down and I spent a day at USC. And Pete Carroll, year number 3, he had just won the Heisman Trophy with Carson Palmer the year before. They were starting to trend up. And it was going into that season, they won a national championship. And I remember just saying, Coach, I want to learn as much as I can about what I'm looking for, because as a player, you look for certain things. As a coach, you're looking for certain things. But as an evaluator, you're looking for maybe different things. You're looking for traits. And I remember Pete Carroll said, don't be a stat scout. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? He said, on any given Friday night, quarterbacks are throwing touchdown passes. Running backs are rushing for touchdowns. Wide receivers are catching touchdown passes. Offensive linemen are making pancakes. Defensive linemen are getting sacks. Linebackers are making tackles. DBs are picking off the pass. That happens in every football game around the country. That does not mean that all those guys are Division I football players. It means they help their team on Friday night. We're not looking for the guys that are making plays just on Friday night. That's what you're supposed to do. You did your job. Good job. Congratulations. We're looking for the guys that can help us on Saturday. And a lot of times those guys are not the finished products in football. They're the guys that are the long-term play. And it's funny because I look back at one of my biggest losses I ever took in terms of where I ranked a guy was in 2008. And everybody in the country rated this guy as the number 1 running back in the country. A kid named Daryl Scott went to Moore Park High School, and his senior year went to St. Bonaventure High School. Yeah. I'm a Ventura High grad, so it was always hard to root for St. Bonaventure, but here's this guy. He was the closest thing to Adrian Peterson you were seeing in high school.
Yeah.
Well, that year, the number 2 and the number 3 player in the West happened to be Tyron Smith and Matt Khalil, who in consecutive drafts were the first offensive tackle drafted in each draft, both top 10 picks. And I went Daryl Scott over both of them. Now, everybody wanted Daryl Scott. I mean, Mac Brown didn't even need to leave an 100-mile radius, and he did an in-home visit in Moore Park / Ventura. He wanted Daryl Scott coming off the national championship 2 years before. So that's how good it was. But I remember, when going back to the Smith-Khalil debate, and I remember having this conversation with Frank Khalil, Matt's dad, and Ryan, who was at that point already drafted in the NFL.
Yeah,
why do you have? Correct? He was a center. Yeah, played 10 years with the Panthers, and his dad's like, "Well, why do you have Tyrone rated ahead of Matt?" I'm like, "Well, it's a long-term game. I think Matt's a better player right now. Tyrone might end up being a better pro because he had the prototypical size and frame, but he was like 250, 260 in high school, whereas Matt was 6'8". Frank was big, Ryan was big, so Matt ended up having a much better career at USC." Tyrone ended up becoming the highest paid left tackle in the NFL, multiple-time Pro Bowler, and Matt's not in the NFL anymore. So it was all about the projection, the long-term plan. And then when we merged with 24/7, they really became big on the NFL projection because that's where you get graded, right? It's not the college football All-American team. It's now your grade in rankings is based on where a guy gets picked, where a guy gets drafted. So there's only 32 5-stars because there's 32 first-round picks. So you're now essentially projecting a player based on his age, his frame at 16 and 17. You're projecting 5 years down the line. Yeah. It's a speed, strength, skill, speed game. Or speed, strength, skill, size game. So the guys, I've been on unofficial visits just as observing. First thing you do when you walk into a football office is they measure your height, they measure your weight, or they take your weight, they measure your arms, they measure your hands, and they measure your wingspan. They're looking at the frame. So it's all about projected with like the frame. Hey, he's 6'3" and he's got a 73-inch wing. Well, he's got short arms. Well, he's 6'5", he's got an 82-inch wing. Well, now you're cooking with a whole different set of utensils.
Yeah.
And so it's big on projections. And, we use track data, whether the verified measurements are big, verified testing time becomes big, shuttle, L-cone, vertical, broad, 40. But then you look at track times, whether he's a thrower, if he's a big guy, whether he's but if he's a speedy guy. And so it's so much projection. Now, the NFL, when they're drafting you, they're not projecting you anymore. The NBA, they are. You could take a guy who was the 9th man on his team, draft him in the first round, stash him on your bench for 4 years. The NFL, if you're drafting a guy in the first round, he sure as hell better be on your field starting come that second Sunday in September. So we're trying to find those guys at 16 and 17 that in 5 years from now, they're going to be in the green room and they get to hug Roger Goodell instead of being at their own draft party,
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's literally like, there's so many things that go into it. And we're talking a lot of metrics these days as well for all types of recruits. But I want to turn it over to Maddie and Elijah. I'm the host. I'm hosting today, but I mean, I feel like we have such a great perspective here that I'd like to hear some of their questions and turn it over to you guys. We still are in our specialties segment, but we might not even have any segments. We might just keep talking to you and just hearing where you're at.
Hey, I'm your typical firstborn. Like why take 2 minutes to answer when 20 minutes will do?
Hey man, we're here for it, man. That's really what we kind of want to. We just want to get that perspective out there. And I know you're all over the internet. I know the kids follow you. I know everybody follows you. But really, we want to push information. And like you said in the beginning of the segment, it's like we're on information overload, and we kind of want to overload this information because we're so relevant in it right now, and kids are so worried about this thing all the time. And we just want to get the correct information out there. Like there's so many things and so many different people in their ears. And I'm going to get to a segment a little later. We call that our gasser segment, which is our nourishment, not punishment. But I want to get your advice a little later on in the segment on advice for parents and advice for kids. I think that's huge to hear. But I'm going to turn it over to Elijah if he has any questions that he wants to ask you directly for specialties.
I mean, I have a bunch. I'm not sure what our practice script looks like.
We're off script. We go off script sometimes. So that's where we're at.
Transition.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess my biggest question, and it's going around. We've talked about this on the podcast before. With all these fake offers, how do we know what offer is real, what offer is committable, what offers that 247 has they have a page of the player and the recruiting profile. How do you know that a player can commit to an offer that he received?
Yeah, that's a great question, and there's a reason we vet offers. If there's a kid that you look at, you're like, no, I don't buy that. I'll text the coach. I'll text the player personnel director. I know most of them at most of the Power 5 schools and G5 schools. And I'm like, hey, did you guys really offer this kid? And he's like, who? I'm like, just answer my question.
Yeah.
And, now there are some offers that the schools say, oh, yeah. I remember having this conversation with a team that was famously left out of the playoff this last year. I won't mention their name, but they went undefeated and then didn't make the playoff. And this was a couple coaches ago, and this coach did not last long. I think he made it through a year and a half before he was fired, but he had an assistant coach on his staff, and they offered a kid out west. And I sent the coach a text. I'm like, hey, did you guys really offer this kid? If the young man wants to think he's got an offer from us, then yes, because if he becomes good, we want him to remember that we were the first one to offer. If he doesn't become good, we could say, hey, man, there's just a verbal offer. So as much as the kids take the strays, there are college coaches that play that game too.
Wow.
They will give an offer knowing full well that they have zero intention of either A, being at that school in 2 years, 3 years from now, and that kid's signable, or B, they also know that, hey, if this kid doesn't become any good, we don't have to take him. Oh, if he tries to commit to me right now, I'm not going to take it. We'll say, oh, young man, take your official visits. but they're buying themselves time in the case that kid does develop. Then they can say, hey, remember, we were the first ones that offer you. So, you see a lot of, and I'm not saying that all schools do that. There are some schools, like Chris Peterson was notorious for, if Washington offered you, they background checked everything before they extended an offer. And then some, they had the mantra, OKG. There were other schools that would throw a billion offers and hope it would stick. And then it's like, raise your hand if you don't have an offer from said university. And it's like, oh, they offered 37 quarterbacks. Go see how many quarterbacks they're taking in a class.
Yeah.
So you have some schools that are David Shaw, when he was at Stanford, and Chip Kelly, when he was at UCLA, those are probably two of the stingiest head coaches when it came to offers. And so there's a lot of schools that just do not offer. So that if a kid got offered, it's legit. They can commit whatever. There's not a shelf life on it other than maybe we already filled up with the position. But there's a lot of schools that, I see this a lot. Oh, well, the offer is really just the interest letter. Well, no, that's not true, because there are schools that throw out offers that, hey, we really want you. We will take your commitment. There's other schools that won't offer underclassmen, period. There's other schools that will offer 8th graders coming in to 9th grade just to get ahead. But and I've said this for a long time in this job, nobody screws up the recruiting process more than adults. And the kids take the blame. When a kid decommits, oh, you have no sense of loyalty. Dude, I had a school during the COVID year. They had a commitment from a kid for a year. And then as it got closer to signing day, they had another kid at that position committed, and they were doing really well with the third player at that position. And they were waiting for this kid to decommit. This kid he would tweet pictures of himself at these games at this school when he was 5 years old. He dreamed for years of playing for this university. But then the school found 2 guys that were better than him. And I remember going, so when's he going to decommit? Oh, as soon as he accepts that, his dream is not going to become reality. And I'm like, dude, this kid has dreamed of playing for this school for a number of years, and you guys dumped him. And now you're getting mad because he hasn't officially said, hey, I'm leaving them, when you guys broke his heart. So when the kid decommits, guess what he deals with? All these fans, you're not a real dude, blah, blah, blah. You suck. Like, bro, I would have given anything to play at that university. They didn't want me.
Yeah.
When guys go into the portal, it's not because they have, an inability to stick it out and, go through tough times. They're being told by a school, hey, you know what? You are affecting our bottom line. You need to leave. Go ahead and go into the portal. Yep. And, the only thing Deion Sanders is getting punished for is being honest, and like he's doing what all these other coaches are doing behind closed doors. So the fake offers, the uncommittable offers, the decommitments, all of that, a lot of times that's precipitated by the adult and the kid catch strays. Now, that said, we always call August 1st Come to Jesus Day. And I'm not here to proselytize or be religious. I'm here to say that's the day where all those fake offers that you got or you posted or you tweeted about, when those official letters start coming in, and there are a bunch of FCS schools, and you said you had Georgia and you said you had Alabama, and now you have West Georgia and Alabama State, you kind of validate what we already knew a year ago.
Got it. That's so crazy to think that. I mean, I guess, and this is something we've been speculating on too, like just as normal, lowly humans, I guess, that we've been called. Yeah. But it's like, it's wild to think that the adult in the situation and the coaches as well are the ones pushing kids out and getting kids in. And like, I don't know, because we did have a segment on that and Elijah brought it up, and it's like, I think it is twofold. It's on the kid, yet it's also on the adult impacting that. But Maddie, what do you got for us?
But let me throw one more thing on.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, please do. Please.
And this is where I think the adults screw it up, and it's not the coaches. A lot of times it's mom and dad.
Oh,
yeah. And I say this as a guy who, and I mean, mom and dad want so bad to tweet and post on their Facebook that little Johnny got this offer when they know full well that kid can't commit to that school. Sure. That maybe they paid to get this kid an offer, paid a handler to get him an offer, and just so they can go in and say, oh, Johnny's going to this school. Like, dude, just save that money because you're going to be paying $30,000 a year for him to go to school in 2 years. So save the money for those cool little Facebook photos and start putting that toward the tuition you're going to be paying for in 2 years. And there's this arms race, if you will, by the parents. Like, if I'm not getting my kid recruiting attention by any means necessary, then I'm failing my kid, and I'm being lapped by other parents who their kids had natural God-given talent that's earning them those offers. So I got to keep up with the Joneses. And the thing is, they're just setting themselves up for more disappointment come signing day. Come a year from now when their kid has nowhere to sign. Well, you had all those offers, and what did that get you? Nothing. He's not in a press release. There's no conference at his school. You're taking a preferred walk-on out of school. In a lot of cases, you're not even getting a preferred part of the walk-on. You're getting a walk-on. And that's where a lot of times the adults just can't get out of the way.
Yeah. Yeah.
I do have several parts, but the main question I have is when it comes to 7-on-7s that you see a lot, how much of the 7-on-7s is evaluated when it comes to their recruiting? Is it just another way for them to show off their skill set? Or would you say like even running track would probably be more helpful for their recruiting purposes? Are there other outlets that can help kids get recruited other than these 5-on-5 for line, which is great to see, but also with the idea that there's no pads on.
No pads.
As an O-line coach, it's an advantage defense too.
100%.
And then you see these guys.
And last I checked, that bag can't move.
That quarterback just seems to be some big fat guy standing right there.
He does zero pocket presence whatsoever.
None.
There's no scholarships to that scout quarterback. But as far as you see in these 7-on-7s, these wide receivers are running some of the craziest routes you've ever seen. It's unrealistic. There's so much throwing. I get it for the teams. I was like, okay, you're running veer and you're a wide receiver in the veer. Like, okay, you need to go off and showcase your skills.
Sure.
But do you find that there's other outlets than 7-on-7 that will help a kid get recruited?
Yeah, I mean, just a sidebar now. Like, I remember going to the De La Salle Sarah Showcase a couple weeks ago. And Toa Faavai, who's the quarterback at De La Salle, all the track guys didn't work out because they were in sectionals. Well, Toa did because he's in a veer offense as a quarterback. He had to throw. DJ Asiasi spends the whole year blocking. So he's using that showcase to show he can catch the ball because he's not going to get to do that on Friday nights. That's where I think the value is if you're at a position that maybe you're being utilized differently than what you're going to be in college. That said, I haven't used 7-on-7 for an evaluation in years. I go to take headshots of guys, to watch guys work out, run around, get an idea of what they look like frame-wise, size-wise, what their competitiveness, if they're acting like jackasses on the field or if they're acting like normal football players. Like, cool. Last I checked, you're not on you're not skiing Mount Shasta. So take the damn ski goggles off. It's not about you. It's about getting better. College coaches, they have their on-campus 7-on-7s. Usually that's like high school teams coming, but it's a spoke in a big wheel with a lot of spokes in there. It's a way to see the competitiveness. It's a way to see athleticism. You get to see if a receiver can, if he can run, if he can get separation, but you're playing on a 40-yard field. You're not even getting a true, and I say this that in the same respect that one of the most impressive players I've ever seen play 7-on-7 was Teddy Bridgewater. And it wasn't because he was this great 7-on-7 player. It was at the old Nike 7-on that they used to do at the Nike facility before the opening. And he was at Miami Northwestern. He had this one receiver on his team named Eli Rogers, played in the NFL, played at Louisville. He had this other receiver named Amari Cooper. Pretty good football players, right?
Not bad.
And they're playing this team from Texas, Denton Geyer, I think is who it was. And Denton Geyer scores like a minute left. And the Nike fields are full 100-yard fields. So Teddy Bridgewater gets the ball back from Miami Northwestern with like a minute left. They get the ball at their own 20. And there's a DJ playing music, and Teddy's dancing as he's calling audibles, and he's just dancing. And I'm like, this guy is so calm and collected. And you could start seeing the Denton Geyer guys going like, uh-oh. And he's getting in their head because he's so relaxed, so chill, and he's dancing, he's smiling, and he's death by 1,000 paper cuts. And now they're freaking out. Boom, up top of Amari Cooper, game over. And you could just see it wasn't what he did in 7-on, it's how he acted. Like Teddy didn't care. This game was being televised on ESPN. It's like one of the first, non-scholastic 7-on-7s that you ever saw on television. And Teddy was so unflappable. It wasn't the 7-on-7 that impressed you about Teddy. It was how he was acting. Like it wasn't that big a deal. He was just having fun. Those are what we're looking for. It's like going to a camp, 5-on-5. I'm not looking to see if a guy wins a rep in 5-on-5 and he gets to the bag and he jumps on it. Great. You also took 7 seconds to get there. That quarterback's already tucked it and ran, or he's already thrown the pass. But I want to see those guys taking rep after rep after rep after rep. I want to see the competitiveness. So the big takeaway from that is competitiveness. It's athleticism. It's just traits, but it is so hard to get a gauge of evaluation. The team that's won 4 or 5 of the biggest 7-on-7 tournaments that exist is this team from Las Vegas. I think the biggest school one of their players went to last year after they won the Nationals was Air Force, and their quarterback went to Utah Tech. They beat the South Florida Express, who had probably the best receiver I've ever seen in high school, and Jeremiah Smith. They beat them handily. Wow. That team with South Florida Express has 10 guys going Power 5, top 300. The team that beat them, bunch of guys going FCS. Well, that doesn't mean that because they won a 7-on-7 game, they're the better team, better players. They're just a better team. So that's why it's fool's gold to rely on that. So it's the same way when you're evaluating, it's kind of fool's gold.
That is amazing. So, okay. So what I basically heard and what I'm gauging for hopefully our viewers and the kids watching, it's the attitude has a lot to do with it as well in terms of your evaluation. Because, okay, so we see these things too, right? Like, so, I mean, we're out there, we're like, oh my gosh, this kid is so good, but his attitude doesn't reflect how good he is. It's like his attitude may be poor. I mean, in terms of your evaluation and maybe what you're writing, or at least taking note in your head, it's like, does that make the rating go down a little bit? Or are we just, or are we just so unfazed because the kid is so good? Because that's kind of what the culture we live in, right? Like the talking, the chirping, the doing this kid's too small type deal. Like when you're watching that, like what are you thinking when like a kid goes and mosses a kid and then does this or does some over, exaggerated, celebration.
See the one.
Do that in a game and see how that, imagine doing that when you got Nick Saban on your sideline or Chris Peterson on your sideline. First of all, you wouldn't be on their sideline because he's not going to take you if you act like that.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. I mean, there's some guys that I'm a Lakers fan. Sorry for any of you guys that are Warriors fans.
No, you're good. You're good.
Born and raised Southern California. You can see Kobe up there on my back wall. And of course, as a devout Kobe worshiper, I was anti-LeBron until he came to the Lakers. Then I, forgave all his past transgressions. But when I watched LeBron and, all the histrionics and all the, the over-exaggerations, well, when you're LeBron James, you can do whatever the hell you want because you're good. So there's some players that can get away with it. But if that's the difference between you and another guy and there's not much of a talent gap there, you better believe that overall overarching picture is going to have an impact on if the school is going to recruit you, because you're not going to do much good to your team when you're getting personal foul after personal foul, when you're getting suspended, when you're doing stupid stuff that's going to cost you playing time and your scholarship. So, I will tell you, I will say this, that it's easy for me to say that because I do feel like I'm taking a get off my lawn type of approach. Mm-hmm. We're also in an era, and I say this as a father of, a teenager, where that is across the board, not just football. That's how all sports are. I mean, you go to a travel baseball tournament, these kids are acting, laughing, and the parents are encouraging it, and the coaches and the dugouts they're the worst. And I'm telling you, I go to baseball tournaments, and these AirPods are the most magical thing. I was at a game the other night, and I was stuck in the middle of 3 fields, and it was like hell for me. I had AC/DC on as loud as it could go on my phone, so I didn't have to hear all the chirping going back and forth. And I mean, it makes 7-on-7 look like, church choir in terms of how peaceful it is. But the point is that, like, you look at it, and the thing is, when you go on, you watch an NFL game and you get Jalen Ramsey going on Twitter, going on a rant and talking trash after, he loses, they're doing what they see their idols doing. They're doing what they see happen in an NFL game. They're seeing what they see happen in an NBA game. So if that's being modeled, how do we punish the 15 and 16-year-old impressionable guys when they're seeing the guys at their peak doing that? And, at the end of the day, the coaches are going to put the best players on the field. As much as they like to say, we want the guys. I mean, Dabo Swinney is being crucified by people because he refuses to conform. And people say, the game's passed them by. Well, no, Dabo just got standards. Chris Peterson retired before it got completely out of control. True. Now it's a matter of like, hey, I don't care how you act as long as you can help me win on Saturdays.
Yeah, Dabo took 0 people in the transfer portal.
I think he's taken 2 total in like 6 years.
I mean, literally talk about ethics and standards. I mean, if you don't take the Clemson way, right, like then, you can leave, but you can't come in.
Yep.
And, you got to respect that. The only other 3, I think, were all academies, Army, Navy, and Air Force. Right?
Notre Dame still hits the portal? Because I know they were like one of
their quarterback this year came out of the portal. Their quarterback last year.
But for some reason, is it still true that they don't take junior college players very often, if at all?
I can't think of one. In fact, I'm thinking it's between Stanford and Notre Dame. I remember one JUCO transfer that Stanford took actually was a Notre Dame transfer. It was Conrad Rulin,
the tight end,
the tight end
from Saddleback.
He was from Mission Viejo High School, went to Notre Dame, left, and Charlie Weiss said, if you are transferring, you can't go anywhere that's on our schedule for the next 3 years. That was the old portal day, or the pre-portal days, where you could tell a kid where he cannot go. So Conrad Rulin went to Saddleback for a semester, transferred into Stanford so he could play there, where his brother Warren was playing, and he's the only JUCO transfer they've taken. And Notre Dame, I mean, I don't think they've taken scholarship JUCO in the 22 years I've been doing this.
Wow. Yeah, that's bonkers. Wow. I mean, this is all great information, B Huff. Thank you so much, seriously. I even wore I got my Boston.
Are we still in preseason right now, or in the pregame? Have we even gotten into the first quarter yet?
No, man, we're just literally. You're hitting all the segments. Like
I talk too much. I know.
No, man, this is great.
That's what a guest is supposed to do.
Seriously,
what would you do for all these coaches that come by and they're like, "Oh, wow, you're actually this tall"? Like they're always surprised by height when they see a kid, because I feel like every coach always takes off 2 inches off height because every kid's going to lie. So
-2 and then -20 or +20.
Right. And do you tell every kid, okay, add 2 more inches onto your recruiting because they're going to take 2 off? Or do you be true to your stats and then they take 2 off and now you go from 6 foot to 5'10"? Now you're not even getting looked at. Do you put down 6'2" so you're looked at 6 foot? Or do you, that's where I don't know where to tell a kid what to do.
Yeah,
I think the more honest you are, but here's the problem. And I mean, I'm going to blame the medical system. You know, when you're 16 years old, you go to do your physical, there's a nurse who's looking forward to her break. She's not telling you to take your shoes off. You're probably wearing Air Maxes. She does not put a clipboard on your skill. She's probably 4'11". She's like, all right, stand up here. You're standing up tall. She looks, she barely brings the little thing down. Oh, yeah, you're 6'6" and you're 6'1". And that's why when you go to an Under Armour camp or you go to an Elite 11, they're doing that bare feet. That clipboard is going right on your scalp. Yeah. And it doesn't matter how high you stand. They are not moving around. I mean, we saw this during COVID too. Guys would say, oh, here's my measurement. Like, dude, your measuring tape that you're using on your wall is 3 inches above or 3 inches below the ground. Like it's on the ground. It's an L. And, so that's why, again, like I said, the first thing that happens when you go on an unofficial visit is they measure your height and the weight. Yeah. Because now they're going to get a good gauge. And I can't tell how many times when you see the results from an Under Armour camp or from an Elite 11, you get the verified measurements. And that's why they call them the verified measurements. Mm-hmm. We saw with Bronny James a couple weeks ago. He was listed 6'4" Sierra Canyon, 6'1", 6'4" USC, now he's 6'1". Welcome to college football recruiting, where even, this kid's got every genetic thing in his favor. And he's still embellishing his height. And so, I say be as honest as possible, because if you say you're 5'11", and you go on your official visit and you're 5'11", the coach is probably going to say, hey, at least this kid's being honest. But you say you're 6'2", the coach comes and you're 5'11", you just, no matter what you do on film or in front of them, you just shrunk. You're now 5'7" in their eyes. Yeah. So I say it's, better to be honest than to try to cover your tracks.
So, B Huff, what was one of your favorite players to evaluate? And so there's a twofold question. Favorite player to evaluate, and then what was a miss that you
I was going to ask that too.
The miss that you had that you're like, oh my gosh, like I can't believe that.
In both ways too.
Yeah.
I was going to say,
I always like to get
5-star. Who did you rank as a 4 or 5-star who was not good? And who did you rank as a 3-star who ended up being the dude?
I always like to start with the bad news first, because then it just only gets better from there. And so I already said Darryl Scott, the biggest albatross around my neck in the history of this job. And again, I mean, if you saw, he came back, this is back in the day, we used to do the scout.com combines, and he's like, what do you think my biggest knock is? This is the Venturas in us we're talking. I'm like, dude, you're a big, powerful guy. We're not sure how fast you are. Mm-hmm. So we were doing the scout.com combine at the Home Depot Center, which I think is like the StubHub Center now, but
the old
Home Depot, exactly, the old venue for the state championship
that
nobody ever went to, except Rain always seemed to find
every time
that one.
It worked for De La Salle every year.
I remember the game. I was doing the game for Fox Sports, the pregame when De La Salle was supposed to lose to Servite, and it was like 41 at halftime. I'm like, okay, well, that was right before that. Sarah got mollywopped by Folsom in the 2A game, and I, to this day, say that the rain affected both those games. But Darryl Scott comes to this combine, and he's like, what do you think is the difference between me being the number 1 overall player in the country, with Terrell Pryor was? Like, it's your speed. He goes, he does all his 4 stations. The last station he runs is the 4. He runs a 4.31. goes over, puts his sweats on, is like, now who's fast? And leaves. And I was like, oh yeah, he just pretty much shut me up. There goes that French kid, a 6'2", 215 pounder. He's running a 4.3 40. There is nothing that he does that you're like, this is not elite.
Sure.
Yeah.
Didn't do crap at Colorado.
Nothing.
And a few years later, I'm out in Boulder. It was Mike McIntyre's first year there, and Darian Hagan's still on staff. And I'm like, I just gotta know what happened.
Yeah.
Like, did I misevaluate? I was like, no, you didn't misevaluate. Daryl misevaluated how college football really was. I was like, oh, that does not make me feel any better, because Tyrone Smith and Matt Khalil had just gone in the first round of the last two drafts.
Yeah.
But, he was a no-brainer, and he turned out to be a non-factor.
Mm-hmm.
That same recruiting, actually it was the year before. In 2004, I moved to Washington. And in 2005, I was at the Tacoma Dome for the 3A state championship game. And Ferndale High School had Jake Locker at quarterback, who I always said, if Jake Locker played safety, he's John Lynch. Jake Locker's biggest issue was accuracy and completions, which is kind of an important thing when you're a quarterback.
Totally is.
He ran the wing T in high school. So you get to see this big dude running, and you're just like, that guy is elite. And I'm like, I think he might be a safety. But he wanted to play quarterback. Well, their state championship season that year, he went off. As I'm watching that game, and they're winning this game, dominating, I'm watching this little undersized lefty across from him. And I'm like, God, this guy is in his fifth read before he gets to the fifth step in his drop. If this guy goes to the right school, he can be really good. At the time, he had no offers. And a year later, he commits to this first-year head coach who had been the offensive coordinator for Dan Hawkins. And this kid chose Boise State over Eastern Washington, his only two scholarship offers. And at Scott.com, I wrote, like, hey, in the right system, this Kellen Moore kid might turn out to be a pretty good college football player.
Wow.
We had him as a 4-star. For years, I would get introduced on this Boise radio station, which was a flagship Boise State station. And the only man who rated Kellen Moore a 4-star, Brandon Huffman. And people are like, well, how do you do that? Well, that was back when we did it where it wasn't based on NFL. It was, what could this guy do in college? Now, did I know that Chris Peterson was going to be this offensive guru? Well, you'd seen it when he was Hawkins' offensive coordinator. But Kellen Moore would go on to be the winningest quarterback in college football history. I mean, before Cincinnati cracked the ceiling 2 years ago, that Boise State team was a missed field goal away from bumping Oregon and playing Auburn for the national championship that year. And you had Titus Young, you had Austin Pettis, and Kellen Moore was a phenomenal college guy. And it was just one of those where, like, this guy's 5'11", 160 pounds soaking wet. His dad's the head coach. He's really good.
He's not very fast.
Very fast. He's not super athletic, but my goodness, the guy commands an offense. I think he lost 3 games in his career. Yeah. So that was a big one, because Kellen Moore's a big name. But in terms of another guy that I just, I sit back and I go, hey, you know what? I have a feeling this guy is going to be really good. And I think we were the only ones in the industry that had him in the top 250. We had Miles Jack as a top 50 player in the country. And the irony there is he played mostly an edge rushing position at Bellevue. He had like 22 sacks his senior year. And him and Buda Baker, back-to-back years, we were the only ones that had him in the top 50. And they both ended up being like top 40 picks. But people are like, oh, Miles Jack, he plays in the wing T, and then he's at Bellevue. Like, how good is he? Can he even cover? He ends up being the Pac-12 Freshman of the Year as an offensive player and a defensive player. And Bellevue had kind of had a reputation in the previous few years of their guys not really doing much when they got to college. So I stuck to my guns, and he was from Atlanta, so he wasn't really a true Bellevue guy, but I did a lot of victory laps on that one with Miles Jack with who he was in college. So those are a couple, but we don't talk. And again, I'm going to say this because this kid's one of my all-time favorite people. Sam Heward, who, with Cam Rising's inability to stay healthy, Sam Heward might end up being a starter at one point at Utah. Okay. But in 2021, out of the top 6 in my region, which was the Northwest Northern California, I had JT Tuimoloau number 1. He'll probably be a first rounder next year. Emeka Egbuka, Emeka Egbuka will probably be a first rounder next year, is number 2. Number 4 was Troy Franklin, who probably should have been a day 2 pick. Number 5 was Brock Bowers, who I thought was the best tight end in the country. Number 6 was Xavier Worthy. But I had Sam Heward number 3, and all anybody wants to say is, "Oh, you had Sam Heward as a 3." Well, let's look at the other 5 guys. Nope, they just want to. That's why Sammy 6 points. I believe in you still.
It's one of those things you do 99 things correct, and everyone wants to point that one thing you didn't do right. Yeah,
100%.
That is.
They're called dads.
That is
our dads.
Yeah. B Huff, this has been absolutely phenomenal. I do want to play one game with you. This is our play the game segment that we have, and I want to. We're going to guess their high school ranking. So I'm going to do 5 guys just quickly off the top of my head that we have, and I just want you to just go ahead and guess the ranking, and we're going to do it over here with you guys as well.
He probably knows it right off the top of his
I know,
head.
that's what I'm saying. So we're going to do first one. We're going to go Christian McCaffrey.
Wow.
Ooh.
4-star. He was a top 100 player.
Oh, dang it, you beat us to it.
I thought you were asking me. Gotcha. I'll shut
go
up.
ahead. I want you to.
And the thing was that 2014 recruiting class that Christian McCaffrey was a part of. You had Leonard Fournette in it. You had Joe Mixon in it. You had Christian McCaffrey in it. Miles Garrett was also in that class. That 2014 high school class, in my 22 years, that is by far the best class I've ever seen. Where I think at Scout, of our top 10 players, 7 were first rounders. Cameron Robinson was the number 1 pick of the second round.
Mm-hmm.
That was the one where it was a tackle with the Alabama, with the Alabama from Louisiana. I mean, that was the one class that the entire industry just nailed. But McCaffrey,
out of
not high enough.
Valor in Colorado.
I went to a game his junior year, a playoff game. He touched the ball 6 times, scored 5 times, and the 6th time he got called back for clipping.
Oh,
yeah. Him and Luke Del Rio was the quarterback.
Yeah,
it was running clock with 4 minutes left in the second quarter, and I underestimated how cold it got in Colorado at night because I came in a t-shirt and shorts, and when that sun went down, it dropped about 30. Thank God for the running clock because I could go fly out.
Yeah.
Well, how much longer did you have to see them play? I mean, they were running clock. The coaches kept them in.
That was back in the day when you couldn't just get guys on Twitter. You had to stay for the game to end to interview them afterwards. It was horrible. Those monsters.
Interview them at
but now that we did our test run,
so we did test run. So I'm going to go.
Don't worry, we were both going to say 4 as well.
I'm going to go next one, and I'm going to go. I'll let Maddie go first, then Elijah, and then you, B Huff. We'll go Brock Purdy since we are Niners fans. We are NorCal people. Brock Purdy, star ranking. Maddie.
Oh, he was coming out of Arizona. He's coming in hot. He was on the champion. Still get the Iowa. I'm going to still say 4.
I'm going to say 3.
3. B Huff.
3.
3 star.
And then
I wanted to say 3. Iowa State was why I said he had
I'd say the metrics weren't there.
It wasn't. And he didn't get a lot of offers until late because that whole phrase, your best ability is availability.
Yeah.
And that same cycle, he did. And Alabama tried to recruit him late. Alabama tried to recruit Brevin White, who was committed to Princeton at the time, and he stuck with Princeton. We made the mistake of then breaking Chuba as a 4-star to, what's the word, recalibrate after being so wrong on Brock. And then we were wrong a second time with Chuba.
I love your knowledge is like literally. I mean, you're a LeBron James fan. Your knowledge is like.
I'm a Kobe fan. I'm a Lakers fan, not a LeBron fan.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Showtime, baby.
So I'll take that out since you're an LA guy. I'm going to take it. Your knowledge right now is like literally Sean McVay. Have you ever seen that guy like literally talk about plays? I was watching that stuff the other day.
He's like LeBron.
It's insane. You're literally on photographic memory.
You're on that level right now. Okay, we're going to number 3. We're going to Travis Kelce. We'll start with you, Elijah.
3.
I honestly want to call him a 2-star out of high school, but I
want to say he was a 3-star.
3 B Huff.
He was a 2-star, and he was part of an era where you just didn't see a lot of guys like that. I mean, it was a lot harder to be a 4 and a 3-star back in those days. I mean, it was like outside of, we had at Scout, we had arbitrary numbers. Like if you were not top 50, you were not a 5. We used to have 55 stars, which is dumb.
Sure.
If you were 300 and higher, you were a 4. If you were 301, you were a 3. He was a 2.
Got it.
Yeah. And I feel like he even got that Cincinnati offer from his brother, just hounding the coaches saying, go check out my brother.
Yeah.
And don't forget, Jason was a walk-on.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wasn't he a running back?
Walk-on fullback, exactly.
Fullback.
Yep.
Some knowledge right there. Okay, so we got Christian, Brock, Travis. We're going to Patrick Mahomes, B Huff.
Okay,
So
that's,
I'm gonna do a
that's a
victory
snack.
lap, pour one out for Scott.com here in a second.
Let's go.
You guys
Let's
say
get it.
yeah.
So we
No,
gotta give.
he went to-
knows
he went
these
to
like
Texas
the back
Tech,
of his
right?
hand.
Yes, go for it.
I'm gonna say 3.
Ooh,
I'm gonna say
20?
3-star.
because he was also in Texas already in
Yeah.
the Texas
Mhm.
Tech. Yeah,
I wanna say
I agree
3.
with you. 3,
I'm gonna say 3.
B Huff.
And there was a lot of questions.
probably a higher
Is he
baseball
gonna-
stars.
That's it. And then that was the thing that kind of, hurt his ranking, if you will. So 24/7, who I was at Scott at the time when he was in high school, Scott actually had him as a 4-star. But everybody else had him as a 3. And so he's his profile says 3 and it's a composite 3. But there was a lot of questions like, well, how committed to football is he really? Because
Yeah.
that was an MLB guy. He was a phenomenal baseball player, big, strong arm guy. Plus, he's going to Texas Tech. I mean, if you were a real dude, you'd be going to A&M. That was the Cliff
Yeah.
Kingsbury, or not, sorry, that was the Johnny Manziel era
Yeah.
at A&M, and he ends up being Cliff Kingsbury, his greatest success story ever. But no, he was a 3 by much of the industry. But believe me, I've got the receipts because I was on the Dan Patrick show one day. I was on the Dan Patrick show like 3 years ago, and he's like, well, you just had Patrick Mahomes as a 3. So I said, actually, my old website had him as a 4, but Dan didn't want to use that. He just, who am I in the Dan Patrick argument?
Hey, man, you're big time for us, so I'll tell you that much. Lastly, Jay Jettis, Justin Jefferson.
Oh, I think he
What
was
was
a.
He had to be a.
I think he was
I'm
a.
gonna give him a 5.
I think he was a 3.
B Huff, enlighten us.
Was he a 3?
He was a 3, and he was like barely a 3-star.
Yeah.
His offer from LSU kind of became committable late. If you go back and look at his composite ranking, he was a 79, which a 79 typically makes you a 2-star.
Yeah.
Our 24/7 has an 83, and the composite though had him as like the lowest rated possible 3-star you could be. And this is who LSU beat for his commitment: Nicholls State, Northwestern, and Tulane. Mind you, if you're an old school college football fan, and there was a lot of love lost between his family and LSU, because if you remember, his brother was the quarterback during the 2011 LSU season where they won that historic 9-6 game, Jordan Jefferson. And then they got shut out by Alabama in the Sugar Bowl, which that game is what created the college football playoff, because folks didn't think Alabama should go it. Yes. And LSU won the SEC, but Jordan Jefferson laid the biggest fat egg he possibly could in the national championship game. So LSU fans were beside themselves. I think Matt Flynn might have been was it Matt Flynn? It wasn't Matt Flynn. It was another quarterback who was the backup, and people were like, well, how did Les Miles not put him in during the national championship game? And Jordan
Messon.
No, because he took over for Jefferson. And what I remember the most about that is when we were still working at Fox at the time, that was the first year of what they used to call the it was the NFL PA game. And this backup quarterback, who it's going to drive me nuts, so I'm going to go find it, who the quarterback was. The backup quarterback actually played. It was it Jarrett Lee? It may have been Jarrett Lee. Whoever it was playing in this NFL PA game. And that was the first interview anybody had done with him since they lost the national championship game. And so LSU fans were beside themselves. They had this generational defense with the Sugar, or what was his name? The Honey Badger. And so LSU kind of, stopped recruiting Justin Jefferson. And that was during the season where Les Miles got fired in the middle of the year and Ed Orgeron took over.
Yeah.
And they made a late push, got Justin Jefferson, and the rest is history.
Wow.
Didn't hurt that they got Joe. Joe Burrow.
Yeah, seriously.
Lost the starting quarterback job to Ohio State, and became generational.
Oh my gosh, that guy's phenomenal. Also one of my favorite QBs out there.
What was he? Was he a 4-star?
He was a 4-star. Yep.
Yeah, he was. And he went to OC first, but
yeah.
B Huff, we're going to wrap this thing up. You have been a phenomenal guest. And like I said earlier in our segment,
very informative.
We just want to wrap it up with some B Huff advice in our gasser section, which is nourishment, not punishment. So we want you to nourish these athletes, and we want you to nourish their parents with any advice you could give them in terms of the recruiting circuit, what you're looking for, what you expect when you go out there. really to kind of help them out and at least give them something that they can go off of as they move forward in their own college or high school experience, Pop Warner experience, whatever it may be. So advice for parents and advice for kids, if you can enlighten us, please.
This goes to both. Put blinders on. Worry about your race. Worry about your path. Worry about your journey. Do not look at other people's plate. Do not look at other people's recruitment. There's no same recruitment, no matter who you are. Okay. I've covered a number of twins in the process, guys that were the exact same height, size, weight, look, and one brother got recruited more than the other, and they're identical twins, and their recruitments were different. Your son's recruitment is going to be different than their son's recruitment. Stop worrying about them. Well, he's getting recruited. What am I doing wrong? Sometimes you're not. Sometimes you're just DNA you passed down didn't make a difference like the DNA they passed down. Focus on your kid. And I say this as a guy who, my son was a solid high school athlete, 3-year starter, catcher, 3-year all-league catcher, but also knew that his dad covered the top 1% of high school football players and knew what an elite athlete was. I had parents tell me all the time, man, your kid's a better athlete than you give him credit for. I'm like, I'll tell you what a good athlete looks like. And it's nothing to take away from my son. It's nothing at all to take away from my son. It's just more like, I know what elite athletes look like. I'm not one of them, but I cover them. Yeah. And 2 weeks ago, exactly. And I remember 2 weeks ago, in fact, it was 2 days before I came down to the showcase, he lost his final high school baseball game. And his best friend popped out to end the game. And, my son, I think, was in the hole. So I was watching him. And when the ball got popped, I didn't see where the ball was tracking. I was just watching my son, knowing that his high school athletic career is coming to an end. And as the ball was caught, I assumed it was because his team started cheering. I just saw him put his hands in his face. And he didn't cry. He held it together. But from the backyard, we're throwing the ball around. He's 4 years old. My dad was a high school baseball coach. You grew up around the game, and after that point, he's still playing travel ball because it's fun. But as I watched his high school career come to an end, I realized that, those 12, 13, 14 years of playing ball together, they're done. We could go play catch. I'll have to take Advil afterwards. But the point being is the culmination of those 14 years of watching him when he was in T-ball and he kept hitting the tee instead of the ball to, being you're playing 3 games at the Mariners Stadium as part of the high school classic. And it goes so fast that immediately I wanted to go back to playing T-ball again, knowing that his high school career was coming to an end. And the next morning when I was flying down to the Bay Area, I got a little choked up on the flight as I was writing kind of like my tribute post and going, man, it does go so quick. And because we both had the realization that he was going to go pro in something besides sports, it made his junior year and senior year of baseball enjoyable. It made going to those games on Tuesday nights and Thursday nights. If you ever go to a high school baseball game in Washington in March or April, it is freezing. And you go to those games and you're just like, I would love to be sweaty at these games, but I'm not. I'm freezing. And then in one pop-up, it's over. Yeah. Parents worry so much about every little thing that they can't enjoy their son's career. They can't enjoy those games. Parents, stop worrying about other kids. Savor the fact that you get to watch your kid play a game that they love. Baseball's got a longer shelf life. Basketball's got a longer shelf life. You go to any park on a Saturday, there's a bunch of old guys playing basketball. There's a bunch of old guys playing softball. Yeah. Football, when you're done playing, you play Turkey Bowl, and that's it.
You play golf.
You play golf. You put a football in your hands. One more, exactly. You can play softball. You can play soccer. You can play. Old guys do that all the time. But football is that one sport where it's gone. Yeah. So savor those moments. Stop worrying about everybody else. Stop worrying about how their recruitment's going. How his career is going. Just enjoy it for your son, because the more pressure you put on him, the more expectations you have that you want to be met for your own edification, the less enjoyable going to those games are and going to those, events are. So that's the one advice I give parent to parent. Yeah. Parent, adult to kids. I said the best advice is very similar. Don't worry about everybody else. College coaches know what they want. All right. If they aren't recruiting, it doesn't mean you're not good in sports. It doesn't mean you're not a good football player. It just isn't a fit for what they're looking for. There's going to be a potential to play 4 years of football, whether it's at, in the big house in front of 110,000 or it's at Chapman College in front of 1,000. football is got this short shelf life. So enjoy it, go be the best you can. But just because you made a catch in 7-on-7, that 4-second clip is not going to get you 40 scholarships. You made a cool Twitter viral Twitter, but that's it.
I love that.
Just play the game because you want to win. Play the game because you love the game. Stop worrying about all the adulation, because eventually that adulation's gone.
Yeah. B Huff,
Preach.
thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did.
That was great.
You were literally spitting straight fire and knowledge for everybody out there that's going to view this episode. So
many things he said that all of our listeners are going to be like, oh,
Yeah.
you guys say this all the time, but now B Huff said it?
Yeah.
Now
Oh,
it's legit.
I'm a dad. I'll tell my kid one thing and like, that's a terrible idea. He comes home from practice. Yeah, my coach said this. I'm like, dude, I literally said that exact thing. But my coach said it. I was like, oh, so now he's smarter just because he said it?
Now it makes sense.
Parents ask me that all the time. Hey, can you tell my kid this? I'm like, okay. Yeah, he said that. It was so profound. I'm like, I literally said the same thing your mom and dad said. It just came from a different voice. So
Yeah.
I back whatever you guys have said.
Well, thank you so much for being a part of Sideline Mornings, taking time out of your busy schedule. We all know what you're doing. And, we want to thank you, too, for how much you do for these kids, for pubbing them up. You're on Twitter. You're on all these different things and getting these kids out there and showcasing their talents. So, and it literally goes from the 2-star kid that you're mentioning to all the way up to the 5-star. So we know all the work you're putting in. We thank you so much for supporting and doing everything and hopping on the pod today. Anytime you're down here, Sideline Mornings will take you out for dinner, drinks, whatever you need. So just make sure you holler. And
you had me at Sideline Mornings will take me.
Yes. So holler at us when you're here. But for all the viewers, we really hope you enjoyed this. We had a very special guest today, Brandon Huffman, director of 24/7 Sports, literally spitting knowledge and fire for you. Always make sure to follow like B Huff too, because the guy's like phenomenal and just knows everything off the top of his head.
Yep.
So we'll keep you posted. But thank you so much. Silent Warnings, we are out.
And don't be scared to write this down.